The morning air was crisp that Tuesday in late October when Tyler Brennan stepped onto bus number 42. He was 15 years old, a sophomore at Riverside High, and lately he'd been feeling like he had something to prove. His older brother had graduated 2 years ago as the school's star quarterback, and Tyler was tired of living in that shadow. People still called him Danny's little brother in the hallways, still asked if he was going to try out for varsity football like Danny had. Tyler had tried, actually, and hadn't made the cut. That rejection was still fresh, still stinging. He wanted people to notice him, to remember his name, to laugh at his jokes. He wanted to be somebody in the hallways of Riverside High, to have his own identity separate from his brother's legacy. Tyler slid into his usual seat near the back, where his buddies were already waiting. There was Connor, who lived 3 houses down from him, and Jake, who he'd known since Little League. They greeted him with their typical fist bumps and immediately started talking about the football game from Friday night. Tyler listened, nodding along, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about how to make today different, how to be someone worth noticing. The bus made its usual stops, picking up more students along the familiar route. Some kids had their headphones in, lost in their own worlds. Others were cramming for tests, their textbooks open on their laps. The morning sun streamed through the windows and everything seemed normal. Just another Tuesday heading to school. Then the bus pulled up to Maple Street, and 17-year-old Destiny Carter climbed aboard. She was a senior, someone Tyler had seen around school but never really paid attention to. She wore a simple navy blue hoodie and jeans, and she was carrying a black violin case that looked well worn and covered with stickers from various music competitions. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she had this focused look on her face, like she was already thinking about whatever she had going on that day. Destiny had been up since 5:30 that morning for orchestra practice. She was first chair violin, and their regional competition was coming up in 2 weeks. Mr. Henderson, the orchestra director, had been pushing them hard, running them through difficult pieces until their fingers ached and their shoulders were sore. Destiny welcomed it. Music was her escape, her passion, and her ticket to college. She'd already received acceptance letters from 3 schools with full scholarships, and she was waiting to hear back from her dream school, Berklee College of Music. Her guidance counselor had told her she was a shoo-in, that her audition tape had been phenomenal. But Destiny didn't believe in counting chickens before they hatched. That's what her grandmother always said. She walked down the aisle, her violin case bumping gently against the seats as she passed. Most of the good spots were already taken, but she found an empty seat about halfway down, right across from where Tyler and his friends were sitting. She settled in, placing her violin case carefully on her lap, and pulled out her phone to review some sheet music. That's when Tyler noticed her. More specifically, that's when Tyler decided she would be his target for the day. He'd been raised in a household where certain beliefs were never questioned, where his father made comments at the dinner table that his mother never challenged, where it was just accepted that some people were different, and that different meant lesser. Tyler had absorbed these ideas like a sponge, never really thinking about whether they were right or wrong. They were just the way things were. He nudged Connor with his elbow and nodded toward Destiny. Connor looked uncomfortable, but Jake smirked, and that was all the encouragement Tyler needed. He started off quietly, making a comment under his breath that made Jake snicker. Then another comment, a little louder this time. Destiny's eyes flickered for just a second, acknowledging that she'd heard, but she didn't look up from her phone. She'd dealt with people like Tyler before. She knew how this worked, but her lack of reaction seemed to bother Tyler. He wanted a response, wanted to see that he'd gotten under her skin, so he got louder. He started making jokes, using words that made several students nearby turn their heads. Some looked shocked. Others looked away quickly, pretending they hadn't heard anything. A few pulled out their phones, not to intervene, but to record, because that's what teenagers do now. Everything is content. Everything is a potential viral video. The bus driver, a woman named Rita Patterson who'd been driving this route for almost 20 years, called out from the front. Her voice was firm and carried authority. She'd seen this kind of thing before over the years. Watched kids test boundaries, watched bullies try to find their victims. She warned Tyler to settle down and show some respect, threatened to write him up if he didn't get himself together. Tyler mumbled something that might have been an apology, but as soon as Mrs. Patterson turned her attention back to the road, navigating the morning traffic, he continued. quieter now but somehow even more cruel. He seemed to take Mrs. Patterson's warning as a challenge rather than a deterrent. Destiny's jaw tightened slightly, but she maintained her composure. She'd learned this from her father, a quiet man who worked 2 jobs to support their family and who taught her that dignity wasn't something anyone could take from you unless you let them. She'd learned it from her grandmother, who'd lived through actual segregation and who told stories about real hatred, not just teenage ignorance. She'd learned it from every music teacher who'd ever told her that discipline and control were what separated good musicians from great ones. But Tyler was getting restless. The lack of reaction was eating at him, making him feel small in front of his friends. Jake was still smirking, but Connor had gone quiet, looking down at his hands. A girl named Ashley, who sat 2 rows up, turned around and told Tyler to shut up, but he waved her off. He was committed now, had gone too far to back down without looking weak, so he stood up. The bus hit a small bump, and he caught himself on the seat backs, using the moment to move into the aisle. He positioned himself right next to Destiny's seat, towering over her, blocking her in. The morning sun was behind him, casting his shadow across her. He leaned down slightly, close enough that his voice wouldn't carry as far, and said something that made Destiny's eyes finally snap up to meet his. Around them, the bus had gone almost completely silent. Even the usual morning chatter had died down. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see what would happen. Some students were definitely recording. Mrs. Patterson was navigating a tricky intersection and hadn't noticed yet that Tyler had left his seat. The moment hung there, suspended like the breath before a storm breaks. Destiny slowly, carefully placed her phone in the pocket of her hoodie. She adjusted her grip on her violin case, holding it protectively. Then she stood up, smooth and controlled, until she was face to face with Tyler. Well, almost face to face. He still had a few inches on her in height, but somehow, standing there in that cramped bus aisle, Destiny seemed to take up more space than he did. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm. It wasn't loud, but every single person on that bus heard her clearly. She asked Tyler to move, please, just step back and let her sit in peace. There was no anger in her tone, no fear, just a simple request from one human being to another. Tyler laughed. It was a nervous laugh, the kind that comes out when you've committed to something but suddenly aren't sure it was a good idea. He looked back at Jake, seeking approval, seeking confirmation that he was still the one in control of the situation. Jake's smirk had faded a bit, but he nodded, and that was enough. Tyler reached out his hand toward Destiny's violin case, intending to knock it from her hands to complete his performance of dominance in front of his audience. His fingers were inches from the worn black leather when everything changed. What Tyler didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Destiny Carter was not just a talented violinist. She had skills that didn't show up on any school record, talents that her orchestra trophies didn't reflect, and he was about to learn about them the hard way. Tyler's hand was moving toward the violin case when everything suddenly changed. In less time than it takes to blink, Destiny's hand shot up and caught his wrist. Not aggressively, not violently, just firmly. Her grip was solid, controlled, like she'd done this 1,000 times before. Tyler's eyes widened in surprise. He tried to pull his hand back, but it didn't budge. For a split second, confusion flashed across his face. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. He tried to jerk his arm away harder, using his weight to pull back. That's when Destiny did something that made everyone on that bus hold their breath. She stepped slightly to the side, twisted her body in this smooth, flowing motion, and suddenly Tyler wasn't standing anymore. He was stumbling forward off balance, his own momentum working against him. Before he could catch himself, before he could even understand what was happening, he was on the floor of the bus, face down, with Destiny's knee pressed lightly against his back and his arm locked in a position that wasn't quite painful, but definitely wasn't comfortable. The whole thing had taken maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds for Tyler Brennan to go from feeling like he was in control to being completely, utterly helpless on the dirty floor of Bus 42. The sound of his body hitting the floor had been loud in the suddenly silent bus. Someone gasped. Multiple phones were definitely recording now, the little red lights showing that this moment was being captured from at least 5 different angles. Tyler's cheek was pressed against the rubber mat that ran down the center aisle, and he could smell the mix of dirt and old gum and whatever cleaning solution they used. His arm was twisted behind his back in a way that made it very clear he shouldn't try to move. Not if he didn't want it to hurt a whole lot worse. His free hand slapped against the floor, partly from the impact, partly from the shock of what had just happened, Destiny's voice came from above him, calm and steady, like she was explaining a math problem instead of pinning someone to the ground. She said she didn't want to hurt him. She really didn't. But he needed to understand something important right now. He needed to learn that respect wasn't optional, that you couldn't just treat people however you wanted and expect no consequences. Her knee pressed just a little harder for emphasis, and Tyler let out a small grunt that might have been agreement, or might have just been the air leaving his lungs. The bus erupted. Kids were shouting, some in shock, some in what sounded like approval. Jake had jumped to his feet, his face red, looking like he wanted to do something but having absolutely no idea what that something should be. Connor hadn't moved at all. He sat frozen in his seat, staring at Tyler on the ground with this expression that was hard to read. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was something else. Maybe he was thinking about all the times he'd gone along with Tyler's comments. All the times he'd laughed when he should have spoken up. Ashley, the girl who'd told Tyler to shut up earlier, actually started clapping. A few other students joined in. Not everyone, but enough that the sound filled the bus. Someone shouted something about Tyler getting what he deserved. Another voice called out asking if anyone got that on video. Of course they had. This was going to be all over social media before lunch period. Mrs. Patterson had heard the commotion and was already pulling the bus over to the side of the road. Her hand was reaching for her radio, calling for school security to meet them. Her voice sounded tired, like she'd seen too many versions of this story over her 20 years of driving, like she was just done with teenagers and their drama and their need to hurt each other to feel important. Tyler tried to speak, his voice muffled against the floor. He was saying something about it being a joke, about how he was just messing around, how everyone was overreacting. Classic bully language when the tables turn. When suddenly you're not the one with the power anymore and you want everyone to remember you were just kidding. It wasn't serious. Why is everyone being so sensitive? Destiny's voice cut through his excuses. She told him he had two choices. He could lie there and wait calmly for Mrs. Patterson to handle this through proper channels, or he could keep struggling, and she'd have to apply more pressure to keep him from hurting himself or anyone else. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was offering him a choice between chocolate or vanilla ice cream. Tyler went still. Even in his humiliated state, even with his face against the dirty bus floor, he understood that this girl was serious and that she absolutely knew what she was doing. What Tyler didn't know, what nobody on that bus knew except for Destiny's closest friends, was that she'd been training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu since she was 8 years old. Her father, William Carter, had been a Marine before an injury ended his service. He'd come home to a small town where opportunities were limited and prejudice wasn't, and he'd decided his daughter needed to know how to protect herself. Not because the world was fair, but because it wasn't. So 3 times a week, sometimes 4, Destiny went to Silva's martial arts academy on the east side of town. She'd worked her way up through the belts, white to blue to purple to brown, and 6 months ago, at 16 years old, she'd earned her black belt. Her instructor, Professor Miguel Silva, always told his students that martial arts wasn't about fighting. It was about discipline, respect, and control. It was about knowing you could handle yourself so completely that you never needed to prove it to anyone, until someone left you no choice. Destiny had won medals at state competitions. She'd even placed 3rd at a national tournament last summer, competing against people who'd been training since they were toddlers. But she never bragged about it at school, never mentioned it in conversation. It wasn't something she felt the need to advertise. Her grandmother had always told her that real strength didn't need to announce itself. It just was. On the floor beneath her knee, Tyler was breathing hard, his face flushed red with humiliation and anger and probably fear. He could hear his classmates talking about him, laughing at him, and he knew, absolutely knew, that his life at Riverside High was never going to be the same after this. The video would spread. People would see. Everyone would know that Tyler Brennan, the kid who tried so hard to be somebody important, had been taken down by a girl half his size in the middle of the school bus. Jake had finally found his voice. He was telling Destiny to let Tyler go, trying to sound tough, but his voice cracked halfway through and killed whatever authority he was going for. A senior named Marcus told Jake to sit down and shut up before he ended up on the floor next to his buddy. Jake sat down. The fight had gone out of him pretty quickly once he realized nobody was coming to Tyler's rescue. Mrs. Patterson had fully stopped the bus now, hazard lights flashing. She stood up from her driver's seat, her radio in hand, and walked back down the aisle. Her footsteps were heavy, deliberate. When she reached Destiny and Tyler, she looked down at the scene with an expression that was hard to read. Then she looked at Destiny and gave a small nod, just the tiniest movement of her head. Years of dealing with bullies had taught Rita Patterson to recognize when someone was defending themselves versus when someone was looking for a fight. This was clearly the former. She told Destiny she could let him up now. Security was on the way. Destiny released Tyler's arm carefully, removed her knee from his back, and stepped away, giving him space. She picked up her violin case from where it had fallen during the scuffle, checked it quickly for damage, and then moved to sit back down in her seat. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was normal. She looked like someone who just finished a routine drill at practice, not someone who just pinned another student to the ground. Tyler slowly pushed himself up, his face still red, now streaked with dirt from the floor. He wouldn't look at anyone. Couldn't look at anyone. He stumbled back to his seat and nobody said a word to him.
Jake and Connor both suddenly found their phones very interesting.
The silence around Tyler was almost louder than the noise had been moments before. Through the bus windows, everyone could see the school security vehicle pulling up behind them, lights flashing. This was about to become official. This was about to become permanent record territory. And Tyler was starting to realize that his attempt to humiliate someone had backfired in the worst possible way. The security officer who stepped onto the bus was a man named Derek Williams, and he'd been working at Riverside High for 12 years. He'd seen just about everything a high school could throw at him. Fights in the cafeteria, kids smoking in the bathrooms, couples making out in the stairwells. But even he raised his eyebrows when Mrs. Patterson quickly filled him in on what had happened. A student using racist language, attempting to destroy another student's property, and then getting taken down in self-defense. And it was all on video from multiple angles. Derek looked at Tyler, then at Destiny, and then back at Tyler. He asked if anyone needed medical attention. Tyler shook his head, still not making eye contact with anyone. His pride was hurt way more than his body, though his shoulder was definitely going to be sore tomorrow. Derek told both students they needed to come with him to the principal's office. Tyler stood up slowly, keeping his head down. Destiny gathered her violin case and followed calmly, like she was just heading to another class. As they walked off the bus, whispers exploded behind them. The other students were already pulling out their phones, texting friends, posting to social media. By the time Tyler and Destiny reached the main building, half the school probably already knew something major had gone down on bus 42. By second period, everyone would know. By lunch, the videos would be everywhere. Principal Linda Washington was already in her office when Derek brought them in. She was a woman in her late 50s who'd been an educator for over 30 years. And she had this way of looking at students that made them feel like she could see right through whatever story they were about to tell her. She asked Derek to wait outside with Tyler while she spoke to Destiny first. Standard procedure. Get separate accounts before anyone had time to coordinate their stories. Destiny sat in the chair across from Principal Washington's desk and calmly explained what had happened. She didn't embellish, didn't try to make herself sound like a hero. She just stated the facts. Tyler had been making racist comments. She'd asked him to stop. He'd escalated. He'd reached for her violin case in what appeared to be an attempt to knock it from her hands or damage it. She'd defended herself and her property. She'd used only the force necessary to stop the situation. She'd caused no injury. Principal Washington listened, taking notes. When Destiny finished, she asked if Destiny wanted to file a formal complaint about the racist language. Destiny thought about it, then said yes. This wasn't the first time Tyler had made comments, just the first time he'd been bold enough to do it publicly. This felt like a line that needed to be drawn. Then it was Tyler's turn. He slumped into the chair, already preparing his defense. He started saying it was all a joke, that people were too sensitive, that he barely touched her. Principal Washington let him talk for about 30 seconds before holding up her hand. She told him she'd already seen the video. 3 different copies sent to her phone while he sat outside, so maybe he wanted to try being honest instead. Tyler's face went pale. He hadn't realized how fast the videos had spread. Hadn't thought about the fact that evidence of everything he'd said and done was now preserved in digital form. He tried a different approach. He said he was sorry, that he didn't mean any of it, that it wouldn't happen again. His voice cracked a little, and for a moment he looked less like the cocky, kid from the bus and more like a scared 15-year-old who was starting to understand he'd made a massive mistake, but Principal Washington had been doing this job too long to be swayed by sudden remorse that only appeared after consequences loomed. She pulled up one of the videos on her computer and made Tyler watch it, made him listen to his own voice saying those words, watch himself corner Destiny, see himself reach for her violin case. When it was over, she asked him if that looked like joking around to him. Tyler stared at his hands and said nothing. The consequences came fast. Tyler was suspended for 2 weeks, effective immediately. He'd attend diversity training sessions before returning. He'd meet with the school counselor twice weekly, and there would be a formal hearing to determine if additional action was necessary. Principal Washington made clear this behavior had no place at Riverside High, and if anything similar happened again, expulsion would be considered. She called Tyler's parents next. His mother answered, and Principal Washington could hear the confusion turn to shock as the situation was explained. Mrs. Brennan said she'd be there within 20 minutes. When she arrived, she looked tired and embarrassed and angry. She barely looked at Tyler as Principal Washington showed her the video. When it was over, Mrs. Brennan's first words were that she didn't raise her son to act like this, but her face suggested she knew where Tyler might have learned those attitudes. Meanwhile, word was spreading through Riverside High like wildfire. Students gathered in small groups between classes, phones out, watching the videos repeatedly. Some kids were cheering for Destiny. Others were making jokes and memes. A few of Tyler's friends tried to defend him, but their voices were drowned out by the majority who were shocked someone had finally stood up to his behavior. Destiny's friends found her at lunch. Her best friend Alicia practically tackled her with a hug, asking if she was okay. Destiny gave them the short version, downplaying her role, but her friends weren't having it. They'd seen the videos. They knew their friend was trained in martial arts, but seeing her actually use those skills was something else entirely. By the end of the school day, local news had picked up the story. A student reporter from the school newspaper wanted an interview. Principal Washington had to send out an email to all parents, explaining that an incident had occurred on school transportation and was being handled. Appropriately, Tyler spent those first hours after the suspension sitting in his room, watching his phone blow up with notifications, messages from people he barely knew, comments on posts he wasn't even tagged in. His Instagram was getting flooded. Someone had created a hashtag that was trending locally. His whole world felt like it was collapsing. His father came home from work early. Tyler heard the front door slam, heard his parents' voices raised in the kitchen. He couldn't make out all the words, but he caught enough. His mother was upset. His father was defensive, then angry. Tyler realized his dad was probably where he'd learned some of those attitudes. But hearing them argued about made something shift in Tyler's mind. Destiny, meanwhile, was dealing with her own attention. Her phone was blowing up too, but for different reasons. People wanted to know where she trained, how long she'd been doing martial arts. Some messages were supportive. Others were uncomfortable, treating her like an action movie character. A few were hateful, saying she'd overreacted. Her father picked her up after school instead of making her take the bus home. He gave her a long look when she got in the car, then asked if she was all right. Destiny nodded. She told him about what happened, about how she'd used the techniques he'd taught her, about how she'd stayed in control the whole time. William Carter listened quietly, his hands tight on the steering wheel. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he told her he was proud of her. Not for the takedown itself, but for keeping her composure, for not letting anger control her actions, for defending herself without causing unnecessary harm. That evening, Destiny's phone rang. It was Principal Washington. She wanted Destiny to know that the school stood behind her completely, that this was clearly self-defense and there would be no disciplinary action. She also warned that the story was gaining traction and to be prepared for attention. If Destiny or her family wanted to make a statement, the school would support them. If they wanted privacy, the school would protect that too. Destiny thanked her and hung up. She sat on her bed, her violin case beside her, and thought about everything that had happened. She hadn't wanted any of this. She'd just wanted to ride the bus to school, practice her music, focus on her college applications. But Tyler had made a choice that morning, and that choice had set off a chain reaction neither of them could have predicted. Now they were both dealing with consequences that would follow them for a long time. 3 months had passed since that morning on Bus 42, and the world looked different for both Tyler and Destiny. The viral videos had eventually faded from social media feeds, replaced by newer drama and fresher scandals. But the impact of that day lingered in ways neither of them could have predicted. Tyler had returned to school after his suspension, and it was brutal. Walking through those hallways felt like walking through a minefield. Some students ignored him completely, looking right through him like he didn't exist. Others whispered as he passed, not even trying to hide it. A few brave ones made comments loud enough for him to hear. Someone had photoshopped his face onto a meme that kept circulating. His locker had been vandalized twice in the first week back. The football team he'd hoped to make next year had made it clear he wasn't welcome to try out. Jake and Connor, his friends from the bus, had distanced themselves almost immediately. They still nodded at him in the hallways, but the invitations to hang out had stopped. The group chats had gone quiet. Tyler ate lunch alone now, usually in the library where fewer people would stare. He'd gone from wanting to be noticed to wishing he could be invisible. But something unexpected was happening during those lonely lunch periods. Tyler had started reading, not because he wanted to, but because it was part of his mandatory counseling with Dr. Patricia Morris, the school psychologist. She'd assigned him books about racism, about privilege, about how prejudice gets passed down through families. At first, Tyler skimmed through them just to check boxes. Then one book hit different. It was a memoir written by a black man who'd grown up in a small town not unlike Tyler's own. The man described experiences that Tyler had never thought about. Being followed in stores, having teachers assume he was less intelligent, watching his mother hold her breath every time his father got pulled over by police. Reading those words, Tyler started to see how his comments on the bus weren't just words. They were connected to something bigger, something that caused real pain to real people. Dr. Morris had a way of asking questions that made Tyler uncomfortable in a good way. She didn't lecture him or tell him he was a bad person. She just asked him to think. To really think about where his beliefs came from, about whether he'd ever questioned them, about what kind of person he wanted to be versus what kind of person he was becoming. Tyler found himself actually looking forward to their twice-weekly sessions, even though he'd never admit it to anyone. The diversity training sessions were different. Those were held in a community center with students from 3 different schools who'd all gotten in trouble for similar incidents. Tyler sat in a circle with kids he didn't know, listening to their stories, hearing them justify their actions in ways that sounded disturbingly familiar. Tyler heard his own excuses coming out of their mouths, and it made him feel sick. The facilitator, a woman named Ms. Angela Chen, had a different approach than Dr. Morris. She brought in guest speakers. Each person shared stories about experiencing discrimination, chipping away at Tyler's defenses with real experiences he'd never considered. Then Ms. Chen did something that changed everything. She brought in a virtual reality headset and had each student experience what it was like to be on the receiving end of discrimination. Tyler put on the headset, and suddenly he was experiencing life from different perspectives, facing prejudice he'd never considered. The experiences lasted only minutes, but they hit harder than any lecture. After one particularly heavy session, Ms. Chen assigned them volunteer work. 20 hours at a community organization serving people different from themselves. Tyler almost picked the easiest option. Then something made him choose the Riverside Community Center in a predominantly black neighborhood across town. His first day there, Tyler was terrified. He'd volunteered to help with an after-school program for elementary kids. A 3rd grader named Isaiah looked at him and asked him straight up if he didn't like black people. The question came out of nowhere, casual as asking about the weather. Tyler froze. He ended up just saying he was trying to learn to be better, which seemed to satisfy Isaiah enough to let Tyler help him with his homework. Working at the center forced Tyler to actually interact with people he'd spent his whole life avoiding or making assumptions about. There was Mrs. Johnson, who ran the program, a 60-year-old woman with a sharp wit and absolutely no patience for nonsense. There was Isaiah and his sister Keisha, which weirdly was the same name as Destiny, who told Tyler matter-of-factly that her daddy was in prison and her mom worked 2 jobs, and that's why they came to the center every day. There was Mr. Raymond, a volunteer who'd taught history at the local high school for 40 years, and had stories that made Tyler realize how little he actually knew about American history. Meanwhile, Destiny's life had taken a completely different turn. The viral video had brought attention she never asked for, but some of it had turned into real opportunities. A local news station did a feature story on her, not just about the bus incident, but about her music and her martial arts training. That story caught the attention of a national morning show, and suddenly Destiny was being flown to New York for an interview. Sitting on that couch under bright studio lights, Destiny talked about discipline and respect. She talked about how her father had taught her to defend herself, to protect herself when necessary. She talked about her dreams of attending Berkeley, about her love of violin. The host asked if she had any message for Tyler. Destiny paused, then said she hoped he learned something, but that the lesson wasn't about the physical takedown. It was about treating people with basic human dignity. The interview went viral in its own way. Suddenly, Destiny wasn't just the girl who defended herself on the bus. She was a role model. Her Instagram followers jumped from 300 to over 50,000 in a week. Companies reached out wanting her to promote products. A literary agent contacted her family about writing a book. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying, but the most meaningful opportunity came from Berkeley itself. The admissions office had seen the interview. They'd already accepted her with a full scholarship, but now they wanted her to speak at their diversity and inclusion orientation for incoming freshmen. They wanted her to talk about her experience, about handling adversity with grace, about using difficult moments as opportunities for growth rather than revenge. Destiny's father watched all of this with pride and concern. He saw his daughter handling fame with composure, but also saw the toll it was taking. One evening, he sat her down and told her something important. She didn't owe anyone her story. She didn't have to be a role model if she didn't want to be. She could just be Destiny. Destiny appreciated that. She started being more selective. She turned down most sponsorship offers. She declined the documentary. But she said yes to speaking at Berkeley, because that felt meaningful. She also said yes when her martial arts instructor asked if she'd help teach the kids' class. At school, Destiny had her own challenges. Some students treated her like a celebrity, which was uncomfortable. Others resented the attention, accused her of milking the situation. There were online think pieces analyzing every second of that bus video. Through it all, Destiny tried to stay focused on what mattered. Her music, her training, her college applications, her friends, her family. But she'd be lying if she said the whole experience hadn't changed her. She was more aware now of how people perceived her, more conscious of being watched, more careful about what she said and did in public. It was exhausting in a way she hadn't expected. One Friday afternoon, 3 months after the incident, Destiny was leaving orchestra practice when she saw Tyler across the parking lot. He was getting into his mom's car, looking down at his phone, probably trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. Their eyes met for just a second. Tyler looked like he wanted to say something, but Destiny turned away. She wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Maybe she never would be, and that was okay. She didn't owe him forgiveness, didn't owe him closure. She'd defended herself on that bus, and now she was moving forward with her life. What Tyler did with his own life was up to him. 1 year had passed since that October morning on bus 42. The video still existed somewhere online, but it had stopped being the first thing people thought about when they saw Tyler or Destiny. Time had moved forward, bringing change with it. Tyler stood in front of his bathroom mirror on a Saturday morning, adjusting his tie. Today was the spring assembly at Riverside High, and he was about to do something terrifying. He was going to speak in front of the entire school about what had happened, about what he'd learned and why it mattered. Principal Washington had asked him months ago. Tyler had said no at first, but Dr. Morris had helped him see it differently. She'd asked him what he wanted his legacy at Riverside to be. When she put it that way, Tyler knew what he had to do. His relationship with his father had changed over the past year. There had been hard conversations, arguments that got loud before they got productive. His mom had stood firm, telling her husband that if Tyler was brave enough to change, maybe he should be too. It was still a work in progress. But his dad had stopped making those comments at dinner. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. Tyler had finished his volunteer hours at the Riverside Community Center months ago, but he'd kept going back anyway. It had become part of his weekly routine. He helped Isaiah with homework every Tuesday and Thursday. He'd gotten to know Mrs. Johnson well enough that she trusted him with keys to lock up. He'd learned that Mr. Raymond had actually taught his father back in the day, which led to a whole conversation about how some things change and some things stay the same. The center felt like a place where Tyler could just be himself, where his past didn't define every interaction. Isaiah had asked him a few weeks ago if he still didn't like black people. The question came out of nowhere again, just like the first time, but this time Tyler's answer was different. He told Isaiah that he'd been taught some wrong things when he was younger, that he'd said and done things he was ashamed of, but that he was working every day to be better. Isaiah had thought about that for a minute, then asked if Tyler wanted to see his drawing of a dragon. Kids had a way of accepting people's growth that adults sometimes struggled with. Meanwhile, Destiny had finished her senior year at the top of her class. The acceptance letter from Berkeley had come with a full scholarship. She'd given her speech at their orientation over the summer. Standing in front of those college students, Destiny had felt something shift inside her. She wasn't the girl from the viral video anymore. She was just Destiny Carter, ready to start the next chapter of her life. But before she left for Boston, she'd done something unexpected. She'd agreed to be at the assembly when Tyler spoke. Principal Washington had asked her privately. Destiny's first instinct had been to say no. She didn't owe Tyler anything. His growth wasn't her responsibility. But then she thought about all the messages from kids who'd experienced similar incidents. She realized showing up wasn't about Tyler, it was about those other kids who needed to see that you could stand up for yourself and still allow space for people to grow. The gymnasium was packed that Saturday morning. Students filled the bleachers. Teachers lined the walls. A few parents had shown up. The energy was buzzing with anticipation. Everyone knew what this was about. Principal Washington took the microphone first. She talked about accountability, about how mistakes don't have to define us if we're willing to change. She talked about courage. Then she introduced Tyler. Walking up to that microphone felt like walking to his own execution. Tyler's hands were shaking so badly he had to grip the podium to keep them still. He looked out at the sea of faces and saw Jake and Connor sitting together watching him. He saw kids who'd ignored him all year. He saw teachers who'd watched him struggle and grow. And in the front row he saw Destiny, sitting calmly with her hands folded in her lap. Tyler started talking. His voice cracked at first, but he pushed through. He told them what happened that morning on the bus, not making excuses, not downplaying what he'd done. He used the actual words he'd said, let them hang in the air so everyone could feel how ugly they were. Some students shifted uncomfortably. A few teachers nodded approvingly at his honesty. Then he talked about the past year, about the books he'd read that changed his perspective, about the counseling sessions, about volunteering at the community center and meeting people who showed him kindness, about learning that the beliefs he'd grown up with weren't just wrong, they were harmful, about understanding that words have weight, that they carry history and pain. He talked about how easy it is to absorb prejudice without questioning it, how comfortable it is to stay in your bubble, how terrifying and necessary it is to admit you were wrong. His voice got stronger as he spoke. This wasn't a performance. This was real. Then Tyler did something nobody expected. He turned to Destiny and apologized. Not the quick, empty kind of apology people give to make themselves feel better. A real one. He said he was sorry for the words he used, for trying to humiliate her, for making her defend herself when she just wanted to ride the bus to school. He said he was sorry that his actions added to a lifetime of experiences where she'd probably had to prove herself and defend herself just for existing. He said he understood if she never forgave him, that he wasn't owed forgiveness, but that he wanted her to know he was genuinely, deeply sorry. The gymnasium was completely silent. Students who'd been on their phones were now paying attention. This was real in a way that school assemblies usually weren't. Destiny stood up and walked to the microphone. She thanked Tyler for his apology. She told the audience that she'd spent a lot of the past year thinking about that morning, about how one moment had changed both of their lives in completely different ways. She said she appreciated the work Tyler had done to change, but that she wanted everyone to understand something important. The burden of education shouldn't fall on the people being discriminated against. It wasn't her job to teach Tyler how to be a better person. It wasn't any black student's job to explain why racism was wrong. That work had to come from within. She talked about how exhausting it was to be turned into a symbol, to have people expect her to be graceful and forgiving all the time, to have her response analyzed and criticized. She said that defending yourself doesn't make you a hero. It just makes you someone who refused to be a victim. And that's okay. You don't have to be inspiring all the time. Sometimes you just have to exist and protect your peace. Then Destiny said something that stuck with everyone in that gym. She said forgiveness wasn't a light switch you flip on and off. It was a process, and everyone's process looked different. She hadn't fully forgiven Tyler, and she might never completely get there. But she could acknowledge his growth. She could hope he continued on this path, and she could move forward with her own life. Not defined by what happened to her, but not pretending it didn't matter either. The assembly ended with Principal Washington opening the floor for questions. Students asked Tyler about the volunteer work, about how he'd changed. They asked Destiny about her martial arts training, about Berkeley. The conversation that followed was messy and real and exactly what the school needed. After it was over, Tyler and Destiny stood in the hallway outside the gym. They didn't hug. They didn't become friends. But Tyler thanked her for coming, for listening. Destiny nodded, wished him well, and walked away. It wasn't a Hollywood ending. It was something more honest. Two people who'd impacted each other's lives, who'd both grown from it, and who were moving forward on separate paths. Tyler went back to the community center that afternoon and helped Isaiah with his math homework. Destiny spent the evening packing for college, her violin case secured in her luggage. The video was still out there somewhere, still being watched by strangers. But it no longer defined either of them. They'd both learned their lessons. Tyler learned that prejudice isn't inherited destiny. It's a choice you make every day. And Destiny learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is defend yourself, set your boundaries, and keep moving forward. Both lessons were painful. Both were necessary. And both would stay with them long after they left Riverside High behind.